Hello, everyone. I think it's still buffering on Facebook, Sid. There we go. Now I'm live. Hello. So glad to be here. Kinsey Bergwin here. It's a lovely Monday, and I am here for our Monday Live Talk. So today we're going to take a little bit of a different approach. You know me, I always talk about mental health and wellness, especially anxiety. That's my favorite niche to work with are ambitious men and women who are struggling with their mental health or performance. And I help by taking a root-caused body-mind approach to optimize their physical and mental health. So today's talk will overlap with that, but I'm actually going to focus on weight loss. We're going to talk about something a little bit different that can still be connected to, of course, anxiety. Not being able to lose weight causes a lot of anxiety for people, but at the same time it can also be connected beneath the surface when we start talking about the metabolic imbalances and inflammatory connection to weight loss or the lack thereof. You know me, I've talked a lot about how both of those things connect to our mental health and cognition and focus and mental clarity and mood. So sorry, there's a bee up there. So they connect in both ways, but I wanted to take a little bit of a left turn because this is something I've been seeing a lot more of. Let me put it this way. Weight loss has always been a big thing that brings people into our practice. But in the last week, I've been seeing a lot more of that, where it's not just people where these are their chief complaints. And if they lose weight, great. It's more like, I want to lose weight. So that's where I thought it would be most applicable to talk about that today. So what I'm going to go through are 4 of the biggest underlying reasons that I see in my practice that's preventing people from losing weight. Because the reality is, and really this talk is for you, if you've tried eating less, you've tried exercising more, you've tried low carb or low calorie or low fat or Jenny Craig or WeightWaters or keto or whatever it might be, any kind of diet plan, and it hasn't worked. Or maybe it has, you lose weight, but then it comes back quickly. This is for you. If you feel like you're just hitting your head against a wall and you're doing all the things that you read you should be doing, but you're still not seeing the results. So that is what I'm going to talk about today, is why weight loss is so much more than eating less and exercising more. We have to look at the core. I'm going to talk about our metabolism, what metabolism is. Then we'll talk about metabolic rate, and then we'll talk about why it's metabolic rate. That's what really matters, because in short, metabolic rate is the rate at which you burn calories. But we have to look at the things that can affect that beneath the surface. So, and why eating less isn't always the right, and rarely is the right solution. Okay, so for those of you that are joining me now, or if you're hopping on later and you're watching the replay, the recording of this, let me know that you're here. Drop your favorite emoji that represents what your weight loss journey has been like. And then, of course, tag me in comments and questions, and I'll go back and answer it, or I can answer it right here if you're posting it live. Okay, so let's deconstruct why calories in versus calories out is not the answer when it comes to weight loss, and why eating less is not always the answer, the solution that will get results. So as I said, we have to look beneath the surface at what is affecting your metabolic rate. So metabolism at its core, just the definition of metabolism, is the body taking the calories, the nutrients that we get from food, and burning that or converting that into energy, ATP, but we're just going to refer to it as energy. In a nutshell, that is metabolism. So if we have a slow metabolic rate, it means we are doing that slowly, meaning we burn, we burn less calories to create energy. If we have a faster metabolic rate, then we need to burn more calories in order to create more energy. Slower metabolic rate, generally speaking, just for simplicity's sake today, would mean, um, I should also say, metabolism also or your metabolic rate also speaks to kind of your set point. So your metabolic rate, if you're eating more calories, if you're exceeding the caloric intake for your metabolic rate, anything that's left over, any excess calories will be stored as fat. And so if you have a slower metabolism, it's easier to eat in excess of that metabolic rate. And then what's remaining will be stored as fat. In a nutshell, again, this is very simplistic. Now, what we really need to look at, what this conversation begs, is what is affecting your metabolic rate. So if you feel like you're barely eating, right, you've cut a lot of calories and you're not seeing the weight loss that you would expect, that's where it becomes the question of why is your metabolic rate slower than what we would deem appropriate based on the amount that you're eating. So this is where we start looking at things like inflammation, hormone imbalance, gut health, blood sugar regulation, things along those lines. So let's dive into that, because I will say, obviously, for some people, they eat less, they exercise more, and they lose weight, right? It may have truly been the problem all along, may have truly been a problem with consumption, eating in excess of they were eating too much. But that is, I'm going to say rare. And what I mean by rare is if that's really all that it was for most people, we probably wouldn't have an obesity epidemic, because most people, that's their go-to. That's what they try, right? They try that and they're not getting results. And so that's when they start seeking professional help, because understandably, they're kind of lost and confused as to what to do next. If the old adage and what every professional out there says to do is to eat less and exercise more. So that's where we need to figure out what is uniquely affecting your metabolic rate, because just eating less calories won't always fix that. So I'm going to go through the 4 things that we see most commonly in my practice that causes that. The first one is high estrogen. So estrogen is a predominantly female steroid sex hormone. Keyword predominantly. So men obviously need estrogen too, just like women need testosterone. And estrogen is, I like to think of it as a very active, proliferative hormone. So one of its biggest jobs is to help get the follicle ready in the ovaries help it mature. So in the first stage of the female menstrual cycle, estrogen levels are rising to help that follicle grow and mature until it reaches a peak in short, and then that's when that egg is mature enough to be released. So that's what I mean by active and proliferative. But we can also appreciate estrogen is needed for bone health. It's needed for neurochemistry balance. It's needed for the immune system. It's needed for many different things. Estrogen also has a very close relationship with fat cells. So estrogen increases the production of adipose tissue, of fat tissue, and fat tissue produces estrogen. So I want to talk about that piece first. So there's 2 ways that fatty tissue produces estrogen, and it's through the conversion of androgens into estrogens. So one is conversion, the aromatase enzyme converts testosterone into estradiol, and androstenedione into estrone. So fatty tissue, the more fatty tissue, and this is where men, it becomes really important, the more fatty tissue one has, the more of that conversion that can be taking place, where your testosterone, your androgens, androstenedione or testosterone, are being converted into a form of estrogen. That's one key point here, because it can become a vicious cycle. But then we also see that higher estrogen levels increase. Oh, My nanny's back with the daughter. I was like, what is that noise downstairs? I think I'm home by myself. We also appreciate that estrogen increases fatty tissue. Part of the reason for this, particularly in women, obviously, is pregnancy. So in pregnancy, estrogen levels begin rising, so do progesterone, and that will have a woman's body hold on to more fat. In general, the presence of estrogen, higher levels of estrogen compared to men and women, will cause their bodies to have more fat, a higher percentage of fat because of pregnancy. If we get pregnant, and especially if we're in a food scarce environment, we need to have enough fat in order to sustain the pregnancy should we not be able to find enough food. So estrogen increases fat formation, in other words. Now, when it's balanced, when the levels are balanced, then the levels of fat are balanced. But if the levels are not balanced, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute, then that can also correspond with higher fat formation. So when I say balanced, I'm particularly speaking not only just the raw number, the absolute number that we would see of estrogen on a lab test, blood, salivary, urinary, but also in relation to progesterone. So progesterone is a calming, soothing, anxiolytic hormone. It's one of the primary jobs in women is to get the uterine lining ready for implantation should an egg be fertilized, though obviously it has many other roles outside of that. Similarly to estrogen, it is also needed for our neurochemistry and bone health and many other things. So sustaining healthy pregnancy, etc. So the two, though, balance each other out in an ideal ratio. The condition estrogen dominance occurs when there's either normal estrogen to low progesterone. We wouldn't typically see that necessarily be associated with excessive weight gain or difficulty losing weight per se. We will see high estrogen to normal progesterone or high estrogen to low progesterone. Those latter two, that we would see connected to weight, difficulty losing weight. Two key points I want to point out. I already mentioned how estrogen increases fat formation. We can see this very clearly in the fact that cattle, so conventionally raised cattle, are actually fed estrogen to fatten them up faster because we like the marbled look. Makes them grow faster. We can harvest them faster. So that's very clear that estrogen has that proliferative effect on fatty tissue. But then we can also appreciate that higher levels of estrogen negatively impact the thyroid. It increases thyroid binding globulin, so it binds up our free thyroid hormone. And thyroid is critical for affecting our metabolic rate and our ability to lose weight. So estrogen will have an impact on weight loss in a few different ways. It's important to keep in mind too, if you are on birth control, a hormone and estrogen containing birth control, or perhaps you're taking hormone replacement therapy, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. Don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking it. It may absolutely be necessary, but it's important to keep track of your estrogen levels, especially if you're noticing that you're struggling to lose weight. Okay, that's the estrogen conversation. Number two is insulin resistance. So insulin, where do I start? Insulin is the body's main hormone for getting blood sugar out of the blood, so glucose, blood sugar out of the blood, out of circulation and into the cells where it's burned for energy. So the body is designed to be what's called metabolically flexible, which means if glucose is available, which is the easiest form of fuel that we get largely from carbohydrates for today's conversation. If glucose is available, we'll always burn glucose for fuel. If glucose is not available, like if we're fasting or eating a really low carb diet, then we'll shift over and burn fat for fuel in the form of ketones. And our body's designed to be able to do that effortlessly. But in today's present world, there is always glucose available, unprecedented. But there's glucose always available because all we have to do is go to the grocery store. So the body being adaptive, it will lose that adaptation to be metabolically flexible and burn fat for fuel, and rather becomes glucose dependent, which means if we go longer than a few hours without eating, we may notice signs of low blood sugar, like shaky, hangry, irritable, tired, foggy, hangry, like I need to eat, ravenously hungry. I might crave carbs or sugar or caffeine. These are just certain key signs. If you eat carbohydrates, you might notice energy or you might notice fatigue. You crave sweets, particularly after meals. Those are some signs that insulin resistance might be happening. So insulin, when we eat carbohydrates, it converts into glucose in the body. Glucose enters the bloodstream, and insulin's job, the hormone insulin, to get that glucose into the cell to burn it for energy. It's like a docking station. So insulin binds to the cells, all simplistically put, obviously, insulin binds to the cells, that opens up the door and allows glucose to shuttle into the cells where it's then burned for fuel. But if our cells are constantly being bombarded by glucose, and insulin is constantly spiking throughout the day, those cells become resistant to insulin. It's like having a nosy neighbor that comes over and knocks on your door every hour on the hour. Like eventually you're just going to pretend like you're not home. And so that's what the cells do, is they suck in their receptors for insulin. Because glucose has to get out of the blood, insulin keeps spiking higher and higher and higher, try to drive that glucose into the cell. The cells become more and more resistant to insulin. Now we have insulin resistance left unchecked that goes on to become prediabetes and then eventually type 2 diabetes. Now, how that connects to weight loss. As I mentioned, the body is designed to be metabolically flexible, which means if we go longer than a few hours without eating, and we have low, healthy levels of insulin, fasted levels of insulin, that signals an enzyme in fatty tissue called hormone-sensitive lipase to break down your fatty tissue, your stored fat, turn it into ketones and burn it for fuel. If insulin is elevated, though, and it's chronically elevated, that turns off that enzyme. Because if insulin is elevated, our body believes that we're in a fed state. And if we're in a fed state, we are not dipping into our stores, right? It's like if you have a bunch of groceries and you go to the grocery store, you have a bunch of food already, and go to the grocery store and you top off your refrigerator, hopefully you're going to eat the first stuff, right? You're not going to start dipping it. Anyway, this is a terrible analogy. But what I'm getting at is if we're in a fed state, we're not going to be dipping into our stores. So that means the other thing with that is the one type of cell that can take limitless amounts of glucose. So all the rest of our cells, the muscle cells, any other cell might have met their capacity, their energy capacity. It can't take any more. But the one type of cell that can is a fat cell. So fat cells are much less likely to become insulin resistant. So if the other cells won't take that glucose, the fat cell will. So if the high insulin encourages fat formation. So it's a double whammy here, right? High insulin basically locks you in fat storage mode, and it prevents you from breaking down that stored fat. So the calories you eat have a propensity to be stored as fat. And even if you're not eating, it has a propensity to not let you break down your fat. So insulin resistance is a really big one. I like to see fasting insulin around like 3 to 5. So when we start seeing it around 7 and then definitely in the double digits, I'm raising an eyebrow. That one's not as frequently tested by doctors. So if you have hemoglobin A1C or fasting glucose, you can get an idea. Maybe they don't always directly correlate. Fasting insulin will be affected earlier than fasting glucose or hemoglobin A1C. But if you notice on lab work, fasting glucose, I like to see between 75 and 90. Definitely if it's over 100, and that's a problem. And then if hemoglobin A1C, I want to see that between like 4.8 and 5.1. So if it's above that, then that, especially if it's, 5.5, 5.4, 5.6, and then 5.7 is the cutoff for prediabetes, then again, this may be a problem. Okay, number 3, actually 3 and 4, we really zero in now on inflammation. So food sensitivities and gut microbiome imbalances. Both are major sources of inflammation. With gut microbiome imbalances, we also have to layer in the fact that the gut microbiome and what we collectively refer to as a dysbiosis, which means an imbalance between the good and bad bacteria, that microbiome becomes a source not only of inflammation, of endotoxins. It affects our metabolic rate. It affects our insulin signaling. It affects our nutrient absorption. The gut microbes can actually affect the composition of food and the amount of calories that we extract from the food we eat. So there's many ways that the microbiome can influence our metabolism. That's not even talking about SIBO. I'm talking about the large intestines. When we layer in SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or methanogen overgrowth, now we have an even bigger problem because that's in the small intestines. So that can lead to nutrient malabsorption, to even more inflammation and toxins, and that affects our thyroid health and our estrogen levels and our gallbladder and our liver detox pathways. It is a massive trickle-down effect. With food sensitivities, I want you to think of the adage, the body's solution to pollution is dilution. Actually, I'll say that for microbiome too. The body's solution to pollution is dilution. So food sensitivities, by definition, generate inflammation, because what a food sensitivity is your immune system attacking a food as if it's a foreign invader. And the immune system uses chemicals called cytokines to do that, to destroy that food. It's like using a shotgun to try to kill, somebody coming into your house. That's what immune system does. It's those chemicals that cause inflammation, and it's those chemicals that slow our metabolism. And also, pollution is dilution, can lead to the retaining of water. And that's the other thing I want to talk about. Not only does the microbiome and food sensitivity slow our metabolic rate, but it also can lead to water retention. And so it feels like weight gain, right? It's not true fat gain per se, but it can be weight gain because you're retaining water. And so the number on the scale increases. So what happens is proper hydration occurs when the cells themselves are hydrated. If there's water in the interstitial fluid, the fluid surrounding the cells, because there's an excess of inflammatory exudates and endotoxins and hormones in that interstitial fluid, how that should normally function is the lymphatic system carries all that stuff away and you pee and poop it out. But if it's overwhelming that system, then the lymphatic system can't properly carry it away. Solution to pollution is dilution. We dilute that. We draw water out of the cell to dilute that interstitial fluid. And that's where that water retention comes into play. So the biggest food sensitivities I see are to gluten and dairy, hands down. Corn, soy, and sugar are next. And sugar also more so aggravates that blood sugar signaling too. But then we'll run food sensitivity tests and see people react to like spinach and ginger and peppers and almonds and healthy foods, but not for that particular person at that particular point in their health journey. So that is, again, those are the 4 biggest reasons. So what I see in my practice when I put people on an anti-inflammatory diet, when we go through a gut-focused protocol, I mean, especially just on the anti-inflammatory diet. If that's, I just did a 6-week long series on different types of anti-inflammatory diets. So I talked about paleo diet, low FODMAP, low histamine, carnivore, autoimmune paleo. So if you want more information on different types of anti-inflammatory diets, go to my Facebook group, Holistic Solutions for Mental Health and Wellness. Tons of info there, menu plans available, blog articles, whole 9 yards. But also, I start with an anti-inflammatory diet, and over the course of the first month, I mean, I expect to see, I would say an average is 5-pound weight loss. Some people are a little bit less, some people are a little bit more. For some people, that continues throughout their care with us. But I expect to see weight loss within, like I said, the first few weeks. And it's a reminder that, and they're not eating any less calories. If anything, they're eating more. They're just eating different types of calories from different types of food. And so that's our starting point. But then sometimes we'll layer in, strategic fasting, time limited carbs. So we're talking about when to eat carbohydrates and when not. We're looking at stool testing to assess the gut microbiome. We might be running food sensitivity tests. We might be running hormones. So it's a phasic approach, right? We start with nutrition, then we move into gut health, then we move into hormones, and we kind of narrow it down the funnel. But all along the way, depending on the person, I expect weight loss to be a part of it. So if you are, like I said, if you're hitting your head against a wall and don't know what to do and you're getting really frustrated that you're trying all these things and you're not seeing results when it comes to changes in your weight, or at least changes in your body composition, scale doesn't have to change, but how your clothes fit, photos, measurements, all of that's changing. Schedule a free 15-minute consultation with me and let's talk about what you've tried. Are there other symptoms that you're having, other goals that you have for your health? And if it feels like a good fit, then we'll talk about what next steps look like from there. And if not, that's okay too. So the link is in this post. If you want to take me up on that call, you can also schedule it directly from my website, progressivehealthandwellness.com. And like I said, this talk and all of my others are archived in my private Facebook group, Holistic Solutions for Mental Health and Wellness. So I'll see you there. Thanks for being here today, and I'll see you next week. All right.